The humans of Earth have been on a journey, driven by their will for survival, learning who they are and exploring what their real history is. Charting a course towards a free future with a new awareness of the war on humanity. Escaping deception that held them in captivity. A great awakening is here. Overcoming disinformation. Thinking as individuals and trusting their instincts to guide them to truth. Because truth is freedom. This film features portions of past shows from Tori Maris, former deep stater turned whistleblower, who has been broadcasting since November of 2018. You have access to all the information you need. Let curiosity be your guide, creating a better future for generations to come. In the battle over the land of the free, a conflict of the ages for the United States of America and the world.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're so glad you could attend. Come inside, come inside. There behind the glass stands a real blade of grass. Be careful as you pass. Move along, move along. Come inside, the show's about to start. Guaranteed to blow your head apart. Rest assured, you'll get your money's worth. It had alright, you gotta see the show. It's a dynamo, you gotta see the show. It's rock and roll, oh, right before your eyes. People laughter from the skies, and he laughs until he cries, and he dies, and he dies. Come inside, the show's about to start. Guaranteed to blow your head apart. You gotta see the show. It's a dynamo. You gotta see the show. It's rock and roll.
Throughout time, and any version of history you may know, there's always been the 13 persons, past, present, and future. And you see it as a repetitive, I would say, saga. They believe that they own this biome. They will do anything to maintain that power since they've been able to do it throughout time. So the people that we see in our nation trying to usurp us are just the foot soldiers. And the people that actually run this, obviously we know the queen, right? The bloodlines run deeper than the queen. Frontmen, the queens, the pharaohs, the tsars. You don't see the others. This is a long-standing shebang. This change, this new era, this new age that we entered allows people to see it that way, that we are all shareholders here. We are not individuals to be ruled, but that we rule and govern ourselves collectively. This is why I say the face of the United States of America will actually take shape of what was originally set forth in 1776. When they signed that paperwork, and then taken by a really hot brunette, you know, there's a woman's name on there, right? MK?
Mary Catherine Goddard.
At the bottom, she wrote, printed in Baltimore, Maryland, by Mary Catherine Goddard, her full name, really saying, I support this cause and I want my voice to be heard too.
She took the paper, and before the ink was dry, half of the people that signed it were already scamming on how to revert everything that was on there. The labors of those fruits being eaten today. With the riots, with the division, with all of this.
This is a very telling point of a war that is being waged against the people, stated by Eisenhower. He warned you about it. What have you done to mitigate it? The only thing you can do is arm yourself with what? Knowledge.
It is a significant forward step in our conquest of space and for growth in human comprehension. Already we have improved our understanding of matter, energy, motion, and life processes through our early efforts in space. The characteristics of the radiation belt girdling the Earth, the true nature of our space environment, including solar storms, the appearance of the Earth's total cloud cover, the feasibility of a worldwide communication system utilizing satellites. These and other space ventures have opened new vistas of thought, of understanding, and of opportunity. These, of course, are only beginnings.
Dr. Van Braun, Dr. Glennon, and other officials are on hand to see the president off.
During that clip, which was 63 years old, the same thing was going on. Certain areas of the nation did not want to abide by federal mandates.
Continued progress in the battle against polio is signaled with the start of large-scale tests of a new vaccine in Dade County, Florida. Every man, woman, and child in the county under the age of 40 will get a free dose before summer. No needles, the new vaccine uses live or tamed virus, whereas the Salk vaccine uses dead virus. This is one of 3 types of live vaccines now developed.
Nobody liked Eisenhower, but you know, Eisenhower played the game, but created a certain intelligence group that even until today isn't known about. And that kind of stays all in the family. These people that had access to quantum computing from back in the day. You know, when I tell people the technology we have front-facing, at least 50, 60 years behind what we actually have. And there's declassified documents showing that the government shows you what the perceived thing is. And that isn't even half the story. So even the actual that's been declassified isn't really the actual. History repeats itself all the time because these bloodlines have been able to maintain power so many times over again that they stick to their plans. So you always have to trust the plan. Their plan is a plan that they never veer off of. Trust it. Corrupt people are creatures of comfort. When they go out and they do things that's something novel, look at the crap they did with George Floyd. They look like idiots. That wasn't in the plan. It wasn't in the plan to make a bill for George. It was, but it wasn't in the plan to give him a flag and parade it around and give him like 100 funerals. So they messed that up. It looked crazy. It wasn't in the plan to paint BLM on streets, and hold rallies with no black people, screaming Black Lives Matter. Like, what the heck is going on here? They do not know how to adapt because they have a plan. So when you have a goal, you don't adapt to get to the goal. You have a plan because you knew. Eisenhower foresaw this. He's pretty awesome. That's why I like to invoke him every now and then.
In Washington, President Eisenhower and Britain's Prime Minister Sir Anthony Eden conclude 3 days of talks on world problems with the issuance of a joint warning to the people of Asia and Africa on the dangers of economic or political help from the Soviet Union. They further pledged joint action to defend the peace in the Middle East. Another significant result of Sir Anthony's visit was his assurance to Congress that England needed no further economic aid from America.
He played the game and put in the stops. He put fail-safes that had to wait for the right time, because there's always a right time to respond.
We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
See, the thing is, a lot of people don't understand how intelligence networks work. How there are agencies, one of the 17. One agency with the biggest budget of an intelligence agency, the biggest one, that you never hear about. It has 0 federal employees. Just so you understand how huge this agency is, this agency has no actual record of any contractor in any database. This agency was so secret that your name, identifying information has never been recorded if you were recruited before 2001. Because the NRO was created with the Air Force. That, in essence, had its own branch of the so-called Space Force. This agency's existence, slowly in the 70s, Nixon didn't want it out. But they used Nixon, they used Watergate to find it. Suddenly, this agency that was never on the books, that had the biggest budgets, that Eisenhower created with a special national security meeting. A special one with magical eyes. They sat down and created it, meeting with the Air Force. It's a covert agency that existed for 30 years without anyone identifying its existence at all.
They are silent sentinels. They look and listen from the cold reaches of space. They capture signals and images critical to America's intelligence community, warfighters, and policymakers. They reveal threats to the homeland, provide battlefield situational awareness, support counter-narcotics, survey the damage from natural disasters, and much more. They are the satellites of the National Reconnaissance Office, America's eyes and ears in space. Japan's attack on American forces at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, demonstrated the critical importance of reconnaissance to prevent surprise attacks on the United States and its allies.
The American people in their righteous might.
After World War II, the Soviet Union became America's principal national security threat as a new and potentially more dangerous Cold War emerged. Moscow tested its first atomic device in 1949, and in the 1950s moved steadily toward acquiring first heavy bombers and then long-range missiles as strategic delivery systems. War with the Soviet Union was a growing possibility, and America looked to intelligence agencies for indications and warnings of surprise attack. Using traditional spycraft, which relied on human agents to gather strategic intelligence behind the Iron Curtain, was extremely difficult due to tight Soviet counterintelligence and the closed nature of Soviet society. To offset this lack of human source intelligence, in the early 1950s, the United States conducted aerial surveillance on the periphery of and over the Soviet Union and other denied territories using low-altitude planes, modified for reconnaissance purposes. However, these planes became increasingly vulnerable to enemy fighters and surface-to-air missiles. In November 1954, President Dwight Eisenhower directed the Central Intelligence Agency to begin developing the U-2 reconnaissance plane under a project codenamed Aquatone. The U-2, first flown over the Soviet Union on July 4, 1956, used sophisticated cameras to capture images from an altitude in excess of 70,000 feet, presumably beyond the reach of anti-aircraft weapons. But on May 1, 1960, the Soviets shot down a U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers. The shootdown and Powers' trial deeply embarrassed the United States and prompted President Eisenhower to suspend all future flights over the Soviet Union. The United States needed to find a safer and better method of monitoring potential adversaries. The use of unmanned high-altitude balloons equipped with cameras was crude and unreliable. The CIA's A-12 and its Air Force version, the SR-71 Blackbird, both advanced reconnaissance aircraft that could fly higher and faster than the U-2, would not be operational until the mid-1960s. The United States looked to space for the answers to its reconnaissance needs. America had been experimenting with space-based reconnaissance since the mid-1950s. In August 1959, President Eisenhower authorized the Naval Research Laboratory to develop the Galactic Radiation and Background Experiment, or GRAB satellite, to collect Soviet air defense radar emissions. 10 months later, on June 22, 1960, a rocket carrying GRAB-1, America's first signals intelligence satellite, lifted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida. After the success of the U-2, GRAB, and Corona, the United States established clearer lines of authority to manage America's growing and increasingly diffuse reconnaissance program. On August 31st, 1960, Secretary of the Air Force Dudley Sharp, on orders from President Eisenhower, established the Office of Missile and Satellite Systems to direct the Air Force Satellite Reconnaissance Program. A little over a year later, on September 6, 1961, Acting Director of Central Intelligence General Charles Cable and Deputy Secretary of Defense Roswell Gilpatrick officially established the management arrangements for the National Reconnaissance Program, which consolidated space and aerial reconnaissance projects under a covert National Reconnaissance Office that combined the expertise of the intelligence community, Department of Defense, and private industry.
The most covert, clandestine people on the planet. They could be school teachers, they could be zookeepers, they could be anything. Because there is a lot going on that people don't know. There are projects, there are operations. If you want to get into sci-fi stuff, there are so many operations you have no idea. You remember how they were talking about MK Ultra and how that was like, oh, a conspiracy, yet it was real, right?
Not everybody who sees a UFO is crazy, that our government has lied about UFO information, that it's withheld UFO files, and even spied on UFO witnesses.
Because these are all secret projects that go on. They're Pentagon special access programs.
In 1959, Lockheed's design facility, nicknamed the Skunk Works, had begun working on a successor to the U-2. U-2 designer Kelly Johnson worked on 11 versions before arriving at the A-12, codenamed Oxcart. The A-12 was hoped to surpass Mach 3, or 3 times the speed of sound.
You know, the most important thing for reconnaissance since sliced bread.
The CIA had high hopes for Oxcart. Unfortunately, the agency, already embarrassed by the U-2 shootdown, saw things go from bad to worse.
La invasión imperialista estadounidense a Cuba en la Bahía de los Cochinos en abril 17 ha sido rechazada. Castro es triunfante.
The Bay of Pigs invasion was a humiliating failure. President Kennedy was furious. Richard Bissell, the NRO's first director and Bay of Pigs architect, was shown the door, and the future of Oxcart was in jeopardy. To the rescue came intelligence advisors Jim Killian, former president of MIT, and Edwin Land, CEO of Polaroid.
Land and Killian went to Kennedy and said, look, whatever your feelings about the agency and the clandestine services, there's some very important things going on out there.
The CIA, this fourth unelected branch of government, was an idea that was created in the United States in the 40s and implemented. Eisenhower saw it for what it was, and during Eisenhower's term, he worked within the goalposts subtly and did what he could to mitigate what was to come, especially with some unexpected treaties that were signed and some unexpected information that came to.
United Nations heroes arrive in New York to help launch a nationwide drive for the sale of war bonds. Up Broadway, men of England's RAF, men of America's Navy, men who have met their enemies and defeated them, respond to the cheers of New York's millions.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference. Invited by President Roosevelt to the first major world financial meeting since the London Conference of 1933, they will work in the seclusion of this White Mountains resort. Zhang Shi-kung, one of China's representatives, with Secretary and Mrs. Henry Morgenthau. United States Treasury Secretary Morgenthau heads the American delegation. On the opening day, in his role of acting conference president, he addresses the meeting. To be discussed are plans for the stabilization of world currencies. all agreements must be ratified by the governing bodies of the nations involved before becoming effective. Delegates to this monetary and financial conference pose on the hotel lawn. These meetings are designed to promote trade in the post-war world and to create a foundation for lasting peace.
The IMF and the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, what we call the World Bank, were established with the signing of the Bretton Woods Agreement. We drew a borderline on the Korean Peninsula. We helped destroy China by allowing the communists to take over. It was a busy year in 1945.
Marshal Joseph Stalin, Premier of the Soviet Union. At the time of the first three-nation conference at Tehran 14 months ago, the ground over which Stalin now walks was still in the enemy's hands. The three parties reach a firm accord on military and political points. Coordinated plans are made for great new blows against Germany from all directions. Reaffirming the resolve of the United Nations to cooperate fully after the war, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin reach agreement on the foundations of European peace. An organization for world security will be permanently established. The three leaders reaffirm their faith in the principles of the Atlantic Charter. Arriving at a place called Yalta in the Crimea, President Roosevelt met again with Stalin and Churchill. The war was going very well. With the continuing firm support of the American people and their allies, Mr. Roosevelt believed that final victory could bring a realistic and enduring peace. In his last public appearance, reporting on Yalta to Congress and the nation, he expressed that belief simply. And these, perhaps of all, are the words that Franklin Delano Roosevelt might have wanted us to remember.
I'm confident that the Congress and the American people will accept the results of this conference as the beginnings of a permanent structure of peace, upon which we can begin to build, under God, that better world in which our children and grandchildren, yours and mine, the children and grandchildren of the whole world, must live and can live.
Over the White House at Washington, the flag flies at half-staff as a grief-stricken nation mourns the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States. Inside, in the historic Cabinet Room, Vice President Harry S. Truman takes the oath of office as 32nd President, administered by Chief Justice Harlan Fiske Stone. Mrs. Truman is at his side. President Truman asks the full Roosevelt cabinet to remain in office, expressing his intention to carry on American policies as formulated by the Roosevelt administration.
San Francisco, California, a momentous conference begins. Here, leaders of the United Nations, representing all but a fraction of the Earth's population, are laying the foundations of international security in the post-war world.
The Conference of the United Nations on International Organization is now convened. The President of the United States.
The world has experienced a revival of an old faith in the everlasting moral force of justice. You members of this conference are to be the architects of a better world. In your hands rests our future. By your labors at this conference, we shall know if suffering humanity is to achieve a just and lasting peace.
I have received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government in reply to the message forwarded to that government by the Secretary of State on August 11th. I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan. In the reply, there is no qualification. Arrangements are now being made for the formal signing of the surrender terms at the earliest possible moment.
In New York City, as throughout a rejoicing nation and world, vast throngs of grateful, happy people celebrate the end of fighting, the dawn of peace. 2 million New Yorkers jam Times Square. It's official. It's all over. It's total victory.
In the tumult of war, truth is not just obscured, it's buried beneath layers of deception.
It's one of the great privileges of my lifetime to be able to present to you that great world citizen, Winston Churchill.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
The world citizen Winston Churchill gave birth to that notion. Iron Curtain. To take the enemy they created down.
If we adhere faithfully to the Charter of the United Nations and walk forward in sedate and sober strength.
All scripted, all a facade. They controlled both the narrative and the counter-narrative.
Nobody knows what Soviet Russia and its Communist International Organization intends to do in the immediate future, or what are the limits, if any, to their expansive and proselytizing tendencies.
Still debating the opening questions of voting procedure, the Paris Conference of 21 nations makes slow progress in reaching the more vital matters of peace.
12 fateful months had ended. The tragedy of 1947 was in a different key. Forcefully, Britain's Hector McNeill replied to Andrei Wyszynski's comparison of Mr. Churchill with Hitler. Defending Britain's wartime premier, Mr. McNeill said,
"I'm not going to deal in any detail with his most offensive reference to Mr. Winston Churchill, in which he compared him with Hitler. Mr. Churchill is, of course, a political opponent of mine. I've often disagreed with him. I pray that he may be spared many years so that in my modesty I may further disagree with him. But the Assembly will permit me to say that Mr. Winston Churchill's record against fascism is better than the record of any communist I know in any country in that fight."
In a forthright analysis of Soviet policy, Mr. McNeill went on to say,
"We harbor no hostility to Russia or to any other nation. Our designs are plain, our doors are open, our press, our people, and our parliament are free. And I repeat that for these purposes, the United Nations is at once the mainspring and the prime instrument of our policy."
While the nations conferred, the political skirmishing went on. For the totalitarianism of Soviet Russia, Wyszynski persistently maintained that the Western states were warmongering. The clash between the Soviet creed and Western civilization was on. The Truman Doctrine meant war on communism.
Britain finds itself under the necessity of reducing or liquidating its commitments in several parts of the world.
Had the nations learned the lessons of the recent war? That was the question. The answer did not make easy reading. In Palestine, fighting had already begun. Partition had brought Arab and Jew to grips. In Europe, communist-inspired unrest had paralyzed French industry. By December, it was clear the tactics had failed, but they had brought France near to a semi-fascist regime.
In the background was the growing struggle between two great powers to shape the post-war world. Looking toward Europe from Moscow, Soviet Russia was expansively stabbing westward, knifing into nations left empty by war, with misery and chaos as allies. On orders from the Kremlin, Russia had launched one of history's most drastic political, moral, and economic wars, a Cold War. The United States was obliged to help Europe safeguard its traditional freedoms and the independence of its nations.
Europe, broken and vulnerable to Soviet power, became the first front in democracy's counterattack. In June, Secretary Marshall announced a plan to help Europe rebuild its shattered economy. He urged the nations to get together on their needs, to draw up their own blueprint for survival, which could then be implemented by our government. In Paris, 16 Western nations began to draft their program. Russia and the nations of Eastern Europe within her orbit refused to join and boycotted the Marshall Plan. Work on the blueprint for rebuilding Europe's shattered economy continued on into September. Meanwhile, before the United Nations General Assembly, the world witnessed another forceful demonstration of the new American policy. There was profound concern for the survival of UN itself, as the Russian veto bogged down major issues. To this great world arena came our Secretary of State, bluntly to speak out against the Soviet Union for a course which he implied was blocking peace and which ultimately would wreck the UN. Russia's reply came from Deputy Foreign Minister Vyshinsky. He charged the American government with plotting war and accused many prominent Americans of warmongering. This was the vilification plan as opposed to the Marshall Plan. The shrill attacks on American imperialism were to be re-echoed wherever the Politburo could penetrate. But 6 days later in Paris, the delegates of the Western European nations finally affixed their signatures to a significant document. The Marshall Plan had received the green light. The magnitude of America's future role was given graphic expression by a single sentence in the British press. Never before has one nation carried a greater responsibility for the fate of others in time of peace. Reduced to its simplest form, the bulky Paris report meant that America must again send ammunition overseas. Ammunition for peace in the form of food, machinery, skills, and dollars. Figures quoted reached $17 billion. Americans heard that until this long-range plan goes into action, stopgap aid was needed. Austria, Italy, and France were declared to be in desperate straits by Secretary Marshall.
In order to meet this emergency, I recommend that you give immediate and urgent consideration to a bill authorizing the appropriation of sufficient funds.
Before Christmas, more than $500 million were made available, and the President affixed his signature to an interim aid authorization bill. As the year drew to a close, the first results were being felt. French communists compelled to end their strikes, sabotage, and violence. The Red Retreat duplicated in Italy. Democracy maintaining the offensive in the Cold War, and the European recovery program bolstered each time a communist uprising was crushed. Victories which are the inspiration for a new year of struggle for the right in Europe, the right to live as a free people.
The Marshall Plan has been put forward as something genius. They seeded the money because they supposedly wanted to keep communism out. But that country, the CIA, they claim got the money, is in this little place called Luxembourg, hence why all the companies that Brennan, the new ones that he established, and all the cycle companies are there. So weird. But anyway, supposedly they wanted to create this, but you have to understand that the Marshall Plan was the key component to actually creating NATO. And it was a military alliance between the US and Europe and other nations. This is how we created U.S. bases across the world. And so the Marshall Plan gave birth to that. They monitored big cities and other nations across the planet slowly in order to help them from famine and help them with their industries. The World Bank, the IMF, all of those stemmed from the Marshall Plan. It's a story that they tell you is to stop the Eastern Bloc of Soviet states taking over with communism. But in fact, it was the CIA that was getting 5%, as they claim, probably more, of this money. to establish, front businesses across several European countries that were designed just to further U.S. interests. Now we call it USAID, right? And then the Marshall Plan was tried to be pushed forward more than just 4 years of us dumping our hard-earned cash that we made on the backs of killing all these people, because I don't know, kind of feels like we drove Hitler to that point, but that's a story for another time, right? We made a ton of money as a nation during that period.
If all the nations of Europe were cooperating, but they are not. Far from cooperating, the Soviet Union and the Communist parties have proclaimed their determined opposition to a plan for European economic recovery. The 6 8/10 billion proposed for the first 15 months is less than a single month's charge of the war. This unprecedented endeavor of the new world to help the old is neither sure nor easy. It is a calculated risk.
The big picture.
The CIA, this fourth unelected branch of government, was an idea that was created in the United States in the 40s and implemented. Eisenhower saw it for what it was. And during Eisenhower's term, the creation of the NRO was in fact to mitigate the circumstances of the CIA in regards to our nation, in the chance of, in the future, having a leader that would allow us to break that global network and maintain our sovereignty and maintain our nation as it was intended to be. Which is exactly what the battle we have here now going on.
From 1961 to 1992, NRO managed America's reconnaissance program in secrecy. During this period, the NRO pioneered increasingly sophisticated collection systems as demand for satellite reconnaissance grew.
I'll tell you how there's only one intelligence agency that knows everything. Everyone be like, it's the NSA. No, it's not. And now that we have Prince Andrew, they can only imagine what else we have. I mean, with all this talk about deep fake videos, you'll be surprised what an insurance agent like Nader has. He's a pervert. He's a child molester, a sexual predator, a pedophile. And this is why they're going nuts about bringing John Dean to talk about how he brought down Nixon, how Nixon obstructed justice based on his lies, and more lies. And took down an administration that was actually trying to do their job.
Permanent Washington is in charge. It's not the democracy you imagine. We're seeing that now. So if you want to understand, if you really want to understand how the American government actually works at the highest levels, and if you want to know why they don't teach history anymore, one thing you should know is that the most popular president in American history was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon. Yet somehow, without a single vote being cast by a single American voter, Richard Nixon was kicked out of office and replaced by the only unelected president in American history. So we went from the most popular president to a president nobody voted for. Wait a minute, you may ask, why didn't I know that? Wasn't Richard Nixon a criminal? Wasn't he despised by all decent people? No, he wasn't. In fact, if any president could claim to be the people's choice, it was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was reelected in 1972 by the largest margin of the popular vote ever recorded before or since. Nixon got 17 million more votes than his opponent. Less than 2 years later, he was gone. He was forced to resign. And in his place, an obedient servant of the federal agencies called Gerald Ford took over the White House. How did that happen?
Helms pressed me very hard for some kind of a guarantee that the CIA would always have a veto on declassification. I don't think any president can be in the position of delegating that decision to the director of the CIA. Otherwise, the CIA becomes a sort of self-perpetuating power in the government, and nobody can ever get at anything it ever did in ancient history. He gave me something which I've read on the Bay of Pigs. Well, but it's illustrative of the problem.
Richard Nixon believed that elements in the federal bureaucracy were working to undermine the American system of government and had been doing that for a long time. He often said that. He was absolutely right. On June 23, 1972, Nixon met with the then CIA Director Richard Helms at the White House.
I know what happened in Iran, and I also know what happened in Guatemala, and I totally approve of both. And I also know what happened in the plant in the Bay of Naples after Eisenhower. I totally approve of it. My interest there is not the internal situation, the fight with the CIA and so forth, but the interest there is solely to know the facts. And in the event that as time goes on here, as we get to things speed up, due to the fact that we know that near the end of the war, the who shot John thing, is Eisenhower to blame, is Johnson to blame, is Kennedy to blame, is Nixon to blame, et cetera, may become, not by me, but may become a very, very vigorous issue.
During the conversation, which thankfully was tape recorded, Nixon suggested he knew, quote, who shot John, meaning President John F. Kennedy. Nixon further implied that the CIA was directly involved in Kennedy's assassination, which we now know it was. Helms's telling response? Total silence. On June 19th, the Washington Post had published the first of many stories about a break-in at the Watergate office building.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Unbeknownst to Nixon and unreported by the Washington Post, 4 of the 5 burglars worked for the CIA. The first of many dishonest Watergate stories was written by a 29-year-old Metro reporter called Bob Woodward. Who exactly was Bob Woodward? Well, he wasn't a journalist. Bob Woodward had no background whatsoever in the news business. Instead, Bob Woodward came directly from the classified areas of the federal government. Shortly before Watergate, Woodward was a naval officer at the Pentagon. He had a top-secret clearance. He worked regularly with the intel agencies. At times, Woodward was even detailed to the Nixon White House, where he interacted with Richard Nixon's top aides.
Nixon tried. He thought he knew enough after what happened with the intervention of JFK.
President Kennedy and Governor John Connally have been cut down by assassins' bullets in downtown Dallas. They were riding in an open automobile when the shots were fired. The president, his limp body carried in the arms of his wife Jacqueline, has rushed to Parkland Hospital.
It was an intervention. Something that Pelosi is asking for, too.
It was a group from the CIA, October 22nd, 1963. He signed Executive Order 263, ordering all U.S. troops home from Vietnam. So he ended the Vietnam War. And 30 days after that, he was killed. Vietnam was a CIA project, from beginning to end. So there were people in the agency, and we know who they were. It was David Hadley Phillips, it was Bill Harvey, it was E. Howard Hunt, it was Alan Dulles, it was James Jesus Angleton. We know the shooters. If I had to prove my case that the CIA murdered my uncle, I'm very confident, just on the evidence that is out there now, that would be very, very easy to prove in front of any jury in America. People shouldn't trust me on this. I'm not trying to convince anybody. People need to do their own research about everything. You live in a democracy, make up your own mind. But, one thing my father told me, people in authority lie. And, part of the duty of living in a democracy is to maintain a posture of constant skepticism toward any aggregation of power. And, trusting the experts is not something you do in a democracy. That's not a feature of democracy or science. It's a feature of religion and totalitarianism. It's not a thing. You need to do your own research.
If JFK's intervention wasn't enough to show that the fourth unelected branch of government is really in control, and if Nixon's command of this fourth unelected branch that failed wasn't enough, then I don't know what is. Watergate, best lessons for anyone going forward.
Soon after leaving the Navy, for reasons that have never been clear, Woodward was hired by the most powerful news outlet in Washington and assigned the biggest story in the country.
The Nixon-Kissinger relationship is absolutely a fascinating one.
Now, it's very clear a sitting president cannot be indicted, but he can be indicted afterwards.
And just to make it crystal clear what was actually happening, Woodward's main source for his Watergate series was the deputy director of the FBI, Mark Felt. And Mark Felt ran, and we're not making this up, the FBI's COINTELPRO program, which was designed to secretly discredit political actors the federal agencies wanted to destroy. People like Richard Nixon.
Nixon was only there to serve as a lesson for President Trump.
In many ways, the Mueller report is to President Trump what the so-called Watergate roadmap was to President Richard Nixon. Stated a little differently, Special Counsel Mueller has provided this committee with a roadmap.
And at the same time, those same agencies were also working to take down Nixon's elected vice president, Spiro Agnew. In the fall of 1973, Agnew was indicted for tax evasion and forced to resign. His replacement was a colorless congressman from Grand Rapids called Gerald Ford. What was Ford's qualification for the job? Well, he had served on the Warren Commission, which absolved the CIA of responsibility for President Kennedy's murder. Nixon was strong-armed into accepting Gerald Ford by Democrats in Congress. Quote, "We gave Nixon no choice but Ford," Speaker of the House Carl Albert later boasted. 8 months later, Gerald Ford of the Warren Commission was the President of the United States. See how that works? So those are the facts. Not speculation, all of that actually happened. None of it's secret, most of it actually is on Wikipedia. But no mainstream news organization has ever told that story. It's so obvious, yet it's intentionally ignored. And as a result, permanent Washington remains in charge of our political system. Unelected lifers in the federal agencies make the biggest decisions in American government and crush anyone who tries to rein them in. And in the process, our democracy becomes a joke.
Because all you have to do sometimes, like I said, is pay attention, listen, learn, take notes. Because there will be a time when you can bring that forward. I mean, you see a lot of that happening around, right? There's so much of that on the internet, right? Asking questions, pointing out facts, JFK's assassination, and then Nixon's fall.
This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office, where so many decisions have been made that shape the history of this nation. Each time I have done so to discuss with you some matter that I believe affected the national interest. In all the decisions I have made in my public life, I have always tried to do what was best for the nation.
But when you see a man like Nixon, who was on the in at that time when technology wasn't at the level it is now, fail so miserably. A man like President Trump pays attention. A man who was willing to put his life on the line to fix it pays attention. Sometimes the mistakes and
and the mishaps of those before us are what make us succeed in the future. My failures I wear as a badge and as a reminder to ensure that my children do not have that failure. That is how we work. The wars that are lost in history are lost to teach us how not to lose them again. That's all about strategy.
When the NRO was created in 1961, space-based intelligence was both new, exciting, and involved breakthrough technologies. During my testimony before Congress last year, I made a personal commitment to review and declassify those areas of our business that would allow for greater openness without risk to our mission. That commitment wasn't our first step towards greater openness. You will recall that in September 1992, the existence of the NRO was publicly announced along with 7 headquarters positions.
The NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office of the Department of Defense. This agency is so massive and so secretive that it was in 1992, under Clinton, of course, that the agency's name was revealed and declassified.
And we take satellites from idea to orbit. Technically sophisticated satellites that see and hear. Technically sophisticated satellites that see and hear. Satellites that help find the bad guy, identify problems, and keep us safe. It doesn't matter who gets the credit. It matters that it works.
So this super top secret agency Eisenhower created on his way out after multiple treaties that he signed, after observing what the CIA's actual implementation was, before they were forced to, by executive orders, by this 4th unelected branch, to document every single individual going forward. It was in fact after 9/11, or shall I say in anticipation? Would that be too ugly to say? An action that was to be implemented almost immediately from being proposed with the new House in 2001. Were they actually forced to create a database? Counterintelligence issue files with names, date of birth, social security numbers, point of contact, aka handler, dates when they were received into the program, and the status of any cases or any investigative materials they used, and what countries they are assigned to. This agency was forced to create this database in anticipation of 9/11. In anticipation. And that's a really hard word to say.
Still each breath cut through my skin and blow winter wind.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
Give me time here in the silence and freeze bitter sky.
As I've said before, people like me don't exist.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its dissenters are silenced, no expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
To think, one of the greatest achievements to safeguard the lives of American people, ways, culture, and history. President Trump created Space Force. He knew. You don't have to be a time traveler to know that, but it kind of helps.
My administration is reclaiming America's heritage as the world's greatest spacefaring nation. Now we are ready to begin the next great chapter of American space exploration. Once more, we will launch intrepid souls blazing through the sky and soaring into the heavens. Once more, we will summon the American spirit to tame the next great American frontier. And once more, we will proudly lead humanity. And that's what it is. It's humanity beyond the earth and into those forbidden skies, but they will not be forbidden for long. Economically, militarily, scientifically, in every way, there's no place like space. Together, there is absolutely nothing Americans can't do. When we get together, there's nobody even close. We must have American dominance in space. So important. Very importantly, I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the 6th branch of the armed forces. That's a big statement. We are going to have the Air Force and we are going to have the Space Force, separate but equal. And in December, I signed a historic directive that will return Americans to the moon for the first time since 1972, if you can believe that.
And you have to think about it. Human nature in itself creates this feeling of the need to survive. And it has a feeling to protect. Don't we all have that innate feeling from when we were kids, even if it was a spider outside, to be like, maybe I shouldn't step on the ant in the anthill. Oh, I need to protect it. That's human nature. That's what makes you human. Not only the DNA, but that's what makes you human. You've heard it many, many times before, how to be human is to err, right? To make mistakes. The biggest mistake our nation ever made was the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency.
It was the biggest mistake ever made when it was created in 1947. It's headquartered, guess where? The George Bush Center for Intelligence in Langley. Though one has to give merit that Eisenhower, who was an army general and a statesman that served after its formation, did one thing to make sure, based on what he knew and the treaties that he signed, to ensure that human errors are indeed human errors by the sake of just having an error and not directed malicious intent. Eisenhower, having signed treaties during his time, having overseen and understood the CIA better than everyone, created an agency on his way out that indeed reports to people like Coates, but isn't in effect to report. Now, the only reason this agency reports to Coates is through discussions, how do I put this? Anticipation of things to come. The Department of Defense is moving along on confirmations for Space Force.
Today, I'm thrilled to sign a new order taking the next step to create the United States Space Force. So important when you look at defense, when you look at all of the other aspects of where the world will be someday. I mean, this is the beginning. This is a very important process.
Here it is. I told you in 2019, the Ukraine is the Democrat Party's Hiroshima. And that was published on the 20th of November, 2019. It's important that people understand that people don't read. So, President Trump also told us.
I think in light of all of the things going on, and you know what I mean by that, the fake news, the Comeys of the world, all of the bad things that went on, it's called the swamp. And you know what happened? And you know what I did? A big favor. I caught the swamp. I caught them all. Let's see what happens. Nobody else could have done that but me. I caught all of this corruption that was going on, and nobody else could have done it.
And so, right now, we have to thank God for President Trump, that he did create Space Force, and they are very eclectic on who they hire.
Today, space is essential not only to our way of life, it's absolutely critical to the modern way of war. GPS, ATMs, cell phones, gas pumps, traffic lights, power grids, guided missiles, surveillance, RPAs, ground combat control. There's no such thing as a day without space operations. You just don't see them. Earth is only half the battle. Cyber attacks and jamming of our satellites. Microsatellites that can create a debris field. At 17,000 miles an hour, a piece of metal the size of a coin can be weaponized. Now is the time for a military branch with a clear and singular focus on space. A military branch that protects the hopes and dreams of America and our way of life as the space domain becomes more and more contested. It's time for another giant leap. The United States Space Force is being built from the brightest minds across the space operations of the Air Force, our joint services, and the private sector. We aren't just getting ready for the near future, we're getting ready for the 22nd century. When our enemies ask, what if? We will have an answer. When foreign powers can build bases on the dark side of the moon, when private companies are inventing a new economy beyond our planet, we need to stay one step ahead of the future. And the future is where we'll make history. We will fight in an environment with no up or down, no left or right, where there are no borders and nowhere to hide. Our Space Force is defending our country, here on Earth and wherever our mission takes us. As commerce and exploration expand, we will imagine the unimaginable, anticipate the inconceivable, and prepare for the impossible. We won't just think outside the box. We'll think outside the atmosphere in one of the most challenging environments ever known.
Now let me take you into Wonderland. At the end of World War II, it ended with a bang, with a nuclear bomb. And this was sealed with a kiss. One thing that I've been drawing your attention to for a few years is the START agreement and why no one was extending or renegotiating. Why? Because space. And the negotiation was being done by President Trump to mitigate what they had planned. Well, most of the nukes we have are actually in space. And you're going to hear them talk about it. You're going to see just why President Trump did an amazing thing by creating Space Force. Because when they want to drop a nuke on their own people, they're willing to sacrifice you to make sure that they can usher in climate change real quickly with a nuke bomb and eradicate people and claim war must end. Look at all these people that died. Well, this is how they do it. But the mitigation is there. Funny thing is, if something explodes in space while being launched in space, then you have it kind of almost like an EMP. And I'll show you that. But first, you have to listen to them tell you it. You have to listen to them tell you, oh, we're warning about this. Listen to us very carefully. We care. Sure you do. Of course you do.
I wrote a piece in late October saying we're already in World War III. We are already in conflict that extends so far beyond Ukraine, actually, even within the context of Western Europe. But we've clearly been pretty much at war in space, below the surface of the oceans, submarine warfare between superpowers. I wouldn't even say that this has been happening for at least 4 years, and it's spilled over into public view on the ground.
Well, how's that for a dose of truth right there?
So I find it very difficult to talk about the world order that we're coming into, given how very tenuous and unstable the current environment is. In my lifetime, this is the second time that I have seen the superpowers actually threaten the possibility of nuclear war. The nature of this conflict that's currently underway, I think, is so deeply misunderstood, not framed properly.
Well, when they decide to actually drop nuclear weapons, do you think that they're going to drop it on compliant Germany, or maybe Africa, who they control from day one? See, the only way to get the world to cry, like they did before, when they ushered in the digital identity so they can speed up the process. You've got to hurt the people that are the most rebellious and the ones that have no clue what's going on. That would be the United States. Now, have you ever seen a nuclear explosion in space?
The nuclear warhead will detonate high above the Earth's surface. And people on the ground will not feel a thing. Powerful electromagnetic waves destroy electrical circuits. One of the most wired nations in the world will go dark. This is the worst-case scenario, but one that could happen on your watch. With the fate of millions resting in your hands, will you be prepared for the aftermath? To make the right decisions, you need to know more about electromagnetic pulses, how they work, the damage they incur, what you should not be scared of, and what you should. To help you separate the physics from the fiction is a briefing led by physicist Richard Muller.
An EMP bomb is a bomb that's designed to go above the atmosphere. And you're releasing suddenly all this huge energy. A few percent of that energy is in the form of gamma rays. Gamma rays are essentially X-rays that have much greater energy. You take an X-ray, which is maybe 10,000 volts of energy, and instead give it 1,000,000 volts of energy, and we call it a gamma ray. These gamma rays then spread out. They'll hit to the horizon.
When the gamma rays hit the atmosphere, they bump into nitrogen and oxygen molecules, knocking off electrons and creating electric current in space.
Electrons moving through a wire, what we call an electric current. Electrons moving through space are an electric current in space.
As this current moves through the Earth's magnetic field, it emits microwaves that strike the surface with an intense surge of power.
That's what makes it so damaging, the fact that it's coming in a very narrow pulse.
In less than a billionth of a second, the electrical intensity on Earth's surface becomes so hot, microchips fry, power lines overload, and the electric grid collapses.
Everything with microelectronics in it stops. Your car, your computer, the subway, there's no electricity. And if you think about it, if you don't have any electricity, you don't have anything in our infrastructure, do you?
It would change the game. It would change the world order.
Look around you and imagine what life would be like in a world without power. It's an electronic Armageddon.
So, START agreement. Talked about it many times. Nukes in the air, right? Nukes in the air, nukes in the air. But you know, with Space Force up there, it's going to be very difficult for a nuke to drop. You see how that works?
We may even have a Space Force.
President Trump knew what they were going to do. It would be backup for if Russia dropped, apparently, a nuke on the United States. Because only when Babylon cries does the world cry. They cry for her goods. They cry for her spices and her goodies. Remember 9/11? The whole world cried. We told them to cry, and they all cried. I mean, how could you not cry? So many innocent people were taken out. They needed fear. They needed you to forfeit your rights to be safe. I mean, do you deserve freedom if you gave them up so quick? And now, that's all we need. A nuke. And a nuke just enough to cause trouble in some area, and then EMPs in other, and have the need from the world organizations to come and help us, of course. You know, for humanity. You see, this is how they're moving it along. In 1944, they planned on how to take everybody's money to rearrange the borders across the planet and force people into their system. And what they realized was, while some smart person told them, give them the internet, which they already had, right?
Well, it's very hip to be on the internet right now.
Give them the internet so we can enslave them. It's worked, kind of, right? We were all distracted. Television, radio, because Hollywood was born then like crazy, right? Hollywood was insane at that time. It went from Shirley Temples and Charlie Chaplin's to, you know, dancing gals, movies, and TV. Boy, I mean, we've been working on this plan for, you know, nearly 100 years. World War III was planned in July of 1944 in New Hampshire in a hotel by 44 countries. You see how they operate? They plan. Oh boy. there's a lot of people that don't exist that have been planning as well at the parallel. We didn't start that fire, but damn, we're going to make that bitch roar to burn them up. And that is how it has to be. They are pushing hard and fast. Before we had the internet, before people were plugged into cell phones, before people were plugged into computers and emails and online blogs, there were just people. And so we found how to fine-tune strategies to use the tools that we had at that time. We implemented tools in order to guide people, again, to do and say what we want them to do and say. And this was actually fine-tuned during the 2008 elections because McCain ran because it was his turn. They implemented different types of IIA applications to see who would win.
These days, it's hard to imagine a politician praising an opponent. But John McCain did it when the stakes were at their highest. Here's Lee Cowan.
It was an October surprise, unlike most.
I'm concerned about, someone that, cohorts with domestic terrorists such as...
3 weeks before voters would decide the next president of the United States, John McCain, trailing in the polls, told a crowd of supporters Barack Obama was a good man.
I have to tell you, he is a decent person and a person that you do not have to be scared as President of the United States. Now,
Getting booed at your own town hall can't be easy.
He's an Arab. He is not. No?
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about.
The morning after, the man who would beat him thanked him.
I appreciated his reminder that we can disagree while still being respectful of each other.
Obviously, Barack Hussein Obama won, not only because he had the perfect, combination of internet and media.
It's been a long time coming. But tonight, because of what we did on this day, in this election, at this defining moment, change has come to America.
But, obviously, John Brennan had done a lot of legwork for him in the years before that. I mean, Barack Hussein Obama wasn't destined for 2008. He was destined for 2016.
Well, I think everybody here knows I've lived through some crises and some challenging moments in my life. And I just have to shake my head in wonderment because with all of the challenges that I've had, they are nothing compared to what I see happening in the lives of Americans every single day.
Because Hillary Clinton did not make it in 2008, because of everything that was going on, that Bill Clinton carried over for Hillary, because of Uranium One, because of all these things that were just manifesting, they swapped positions. Barack Hussein Obama was up for, 2016. He was supposed to be where Trump is now, and Hillary was supposed to be where Obama was for the past 8 years.
What is your view of President Obama right now?
I think he's a nice man. I think he's in over his head. It's amazing the way he got the job. I respect him for getting the job, but it's amazing the way he got the job. He signed up people on street corners in Chicago. All of a sudden, he's the president of the United States.
Because, the government has been surveilling President Trump since 2004.
You considered once running for the presidency.
Well, I didn't consider it long. I mean, I had a group. They did a poll.
They already knew that a bunch of people, but they didn't know who these bunch of people were, guiding him to run for president. They were sure that he was going to run in 2012, very sure. And they wanted him to run in 2012 so they can fine-tune their program, fine-tune their strategies. But he didn't. He took a step back and he sat on it. And that's where we knew at that point that it was going to be 2016. Because that was the end of the first 8-year leg. It was a 16-year rollout, right? 8 and 8. All the work that they had done prior to 2008 was the foundations, the things that Hillary did through her husband Bill, because we know he was never president, right? and the things Bush Jr. did through, being ushered by, this fourth unelected branch of government, through the work that Bush Sr. did with William Barr as his right-hand man. 3-term president, that's what Bush Sr. was. So even though they were factoring out votes, Hillary lost so hard, it's ridiculous. They used fake votes, they added that up. Stolen ballots, they added that. We watched everything. We saw every move they made. We watched everything they did. So that way we learned. And now we know. The National Defense Authorization Act that was signed, the 217 that was signed in December of 2016 by Obama, included the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act. That was a law that was passed that would allow global channels, so like news channels from the UK, France and Germany, to influence or to promote domestic propaganda to us. So whatever was targeted for you and me here in the United States, they would regurgitate back to us on a global platform. So they covered all their bases because this Russian narrative really had to stick. Really, really had to stick. This is how the intelligence community, and when we say it, there is no such agency. There's tons of little alphabet soup agencies in one bucket agency, which we'll call the deep state. And we all know it's not the president.
This is called a neuralizer. It's a gift from some friends from out of town. This red eye here will isolate the electronic impulses in your brains, more specifically the ones for memory.
What in the hell is going on?
Excellent question. And the answer you're looking for lies right here.
Who are you? Really?
Really? I am just a figment of your imagination. Damn, what a gullible breed.
You got to shift your strategy. You have to be adaptable. When you're in a war, and this has been a war from the minute they signed the Declaration of Independence, where it wasn't even dry, right? Not dry yet. You were already planning how to, take us over. That was the plan. How to take us over. These rebels, these rubbish rebels. The minute he hit that escalator and he came down, that was it. Trump revolutionized the way people see politics. That is his biggest achievement anywhere. Throughout this is why he will go down as the best president in the United States of America. Because this is the first time people took part in their government ever since George Washington, when they made that decision to break up with the United Kingdom. That's it. We suddenly had this click. Yo, this guy's speaking our language. Oh, he's not PC. I like that. I'm tired of that.
The big problem this country has is being politically correct. I've been challenged by so many people, and I don't frankly have time for total political correctness. And honestly, Megan, if you don't like it, I'm sorry.
No. Racist. Wait a minute. Didn't he get a medal with Rosa Parks? That's where people were like, well, stop. 1 second. We like this dude. We saw him on The Apprentice. You're fired. We loved it. And that's what got us fired up. That is his most major achievement. Empowering the people to want to be part of their country again. Empowering the people to want to take control of their nation again, just as our framers intended. That's what he did.
Barack Obama, who corrupts the Justice Department. It is Hillary Clinton, who routinely breaks the law and gets away with it. And now we have Joe Biden, who's learned. He's learned from Obama that doesn't matter what you do, if you're a liberal Democrat, you will not be prosecuted. He learned from Hillary that a person in high public office can get millions and millions of dollars. And they learned from watching Donald Trump that a true outsider willing to take on the entire system could destroy their entire machine. So what you're seeing across the country is a desperate, last-ditch effort by a corrupt machine to destroy their most dangerous opponent.
From the beginning, the Democrats spied on my campaign. Remember that? They attacked me with an onslaught of fraudulent investigations. Russia, Russia, Russia. Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. Impeachment hoax number 1. Impeachment hoax number 2. The illegal and unconstitutional raid on Mar-a-Lago, right here. They're lying to the FISA courts, and they're looking at me through the Espionage Act. Think of that. How does that sound? Of 1917, where the penalty is death. Even though that has absolutely nothing to do with openly taking boxes of documents and mostly clothing and other things to my home. The FBI and DOJ relentlessly pursuing Republicans. The unconstitutional changes to election laws by not getting approvals from state legislators. The millions of votes illegally stuffed into ballot boxes and all caught on government cameras. And just recently, the FBI and DOJ in collusion with Twitter and Facebook in order not to say anything bad about the Hunter Biden laptop from hell, which exposes the Biden family as criminals and which, according to the pollsters, would have made a 17-point difference in the election result. And we needed a lot less than that. It would have been in our favor. Not my favor, our favor, because our country is going to hell. And we remember the 51 intelligence agents who said Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. It didn't exist. It was Russian disinformation. Remember that? And that was all confirmed strongly by the FBI.
And with that, I just have 2 more words to say. Obama out.
See, all these things that have happened in the past few years were for a reason. The only way to wake people up is to piss them off, right? The only way to make you want to take part in your government is to piss you off.
Still politics. I'm like, so do I.
It's like, yeah. Well, you don't do politics. I'm going to tell you better get that Vaseline jar because politics is doing you. That's the way it is. And see, nobody puts these things together. They all start talking, the World Economic Forum and Atlantic Council and Dude, don't you get it? These are the same people that were in New Hampshire at that hotel for 22 days, holed up, planning this whole shit out. Nixon had no idea that the advice that he got was one of the nails on the coffin.
With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers from our government. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists, Marxists, and fascists. And we will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We will rout the fake news media, and we will defeat crooked Joe Biden. We will liberate America from these villains once and for all.
And the way we do this is by impeaching Barack Hussein Obama.
Really?
Yes, we can do it. They impeached Trump when he wasn't in office. Yes, we can do it. Impeach 44. Impeaching 44 would impeach the vice president, would impeach, and we would be able to reverse everything he did, and they would be stuck with nothing but maybe dropping a nuke and blaming Russia and saying that propagandists are not allowing us to see why it came at us when it's going to be our own people, or shall I say allies. See, that's how it happens. This was well thought out. But unfortunately for them, the people are armed with knowledge. Here's how it's really playing out. They're actually losing. They are desperate. They're constantly reminding people how evil Russia is, and no one is buying it. No one is buying it. The people that are buying it are watching a movie. Movies we watch today look really realistic. I mean, have you been to Times Square lately? You've got 3D images coming out of the wall and you think it's real. See, that's the thing. It's not. And a lot of these things that you watch are a movie. And this is where the CAA stepped in. Hollywood. They signed the deal. Countries jumped on to the treaties. They all agreed on the money. And then they created Hollywood. We need to distract them. We need people to take the limelight, and people they want to be like. We want to tell them, oh, look, you can be as glorious as me, but they never reach that standard. We can always have them trying to be them. And then, because they look up to, we can tell them what to do. You never give up. If you give up and say, oh, that's it, it's game over for you. That's where you lose, when you stop trying. And right now, what we all are supposed to be doing is working together to find ways to keep them all on their toes. Man, this shit all leads back to Obama. Like I said, 2 things I wanted to do before I go. Clear my name and let people know that people like me do exist. And impeach that guy. Because he was the accelerant. This is why they didn't let Hillary go. He was the accelerant, and he's been running the show all along. All along. And unfortunately for them, while they want to take people out, they want to shut people down, they don't know how many people like me are around. They don't know how many, what is it called? No such agency personnel who've actually swung over to the people's side from the 1800s until today. It's still the few making the decisions for many, and that's because they took advantage of the expansion of communications. So that goes both ways. We have the same access to communications now. Therefore, we can actually stop them this time. The new order, or the new world, or the world that we envision will happen on our terms. See you on Rumble.